Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a place.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a
day of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over, not a shadow, not a sign.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a
day of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory. Let us then be true and faithful, trusting, serving every day. Just one glimpse of him in glory will the toils of life repay.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a
day of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus.
All right, so let's look at the first 5 verses of Daniel 6. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give an account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. The king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. The high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." All right, so we're introduced to the structure of the government at this time, and Darius, it says, has appointed 120 satraps. What in the world is a satrap? It's just a provincial government, just somebody that rules a small portion, a small province of the kingdom. So he's divided the kingdom into 120 sections and placed an individual over each section. Okay, our nation is divided into 50 sections, right? Now, you get inside of each of those 50, and there's like, depending on what state you're in, countless other subdivisions. And then within those subdivisions, there's countless other subdivisions. So it's that kind of a structure that's being described here. It's divided up into 120 subdivisions. Then there's a panel, apparently, of 3, we'll call them commissioners, who oversee the 120. And then we're told that among those 3, Daniel is one of them. And Daniel sets himself apart such that he very quickly distinguished himself as being the leading of these commissioners. And it says that Darius decides that he's just going to do what? Place Daniel in charge of the whole mess. Well, how does that sit with the other guys who have some authority? Not well. And by the way, ain't nothing unique about that either. Anytime you have a group of people, you have some who become, for lack of a better term, leaders among the people. Of the group of leaders, if one leader is distinguished and given more deference than themselves, what tends to happen? Jealousy. And that's exactly what's being described here. So they decide amongst themselves, we don't like what's going on here. Daniel's being recognized and he's getting more power than us, and we don't like that. We got to put a stop to this. So this is what we're going to do. This is so common to human nature, it's not even, it's not surprising, I guess is the way I'll say it. They say, you know what? We just need to start examining Daniel and find out something we can accuse him of. We're going to find out. Is that not exactly what people do today to win influence over people as opposed to their opponent who has influence? And listen, if you doubt that, just wait for a political election cycle and watch our political advertisements in this country. 90% of which are telling you what? Look at what the other guy has done. You can't trust him. Look at what the other guy has done. He's a liar. Look at what the other guy has done. He doesn't respect law. Just example after example after example. The highlights are of their marital infidelity and their business dealings and all sorts of questions. What they're doing is exactly to one another, exactly what these people are trying to do to Daniel. We're going to examine his life. We're going to build an opposition research file on them, find out everything that he does wrong, and use it against him. What was the problem? They couldn't find anything. Daniel followed the law. Daniel respected the rule over him. Now, this is even more significant because Daniel was not one of them. Daniel was a Hebrew. And we're not in Jewish society. We're in pagan society. And yet, Daniel had the kind of respect for the governing authorities even there that he respected the law and lived according to the law. What did the text actually say about him? They could find no ground or complaint or any fault because he was faithful. Faithful to who? Yes, that is a loaded question. Who was Daniel faithful to? Yeah. Because he was faithful to God, then he was faithful to all those that God had raised into authority, whether he liked him or not, whether he agreed with them or not, whether they followed the same God as him or not. Was Darius a follower of the Hebrew God? No. In fact, very much not. Though he comes to show more respect for the Hebrew God than some of his predecessors did. But Daniel's not basing his respect of Darius and of the Persian Empire on his assessment of their character. Did they live a model life of sobriety and morality? No. The worship of their God involved the lack of sobriety and the lack of morality. They didn't live sober and righteous lives at all, but he respected their rule anyway. and he respected their right to set rules. And he lived according to the laws because he was faithful. Now, here's where it gets kind of going from teaching to meddling just a little bit. If 120 people decided that they were going to make it their ambition, their sole purpose, to look into your background and to see what kind of accusations they could bring against you, would they come up completely empty? Because that's the kind of character Daniel had. They could find nothing on which to accuse him. Daniel didn't even exceed the chariot speed limit. Nothing. They had nothing. And it got to the point, not only that they said what? The only possibility we even have of finding anything wrong about Daniel is when it comes to him following his God. Where the requirements of him following his God conflict with other things, he always follows his God. Question number 2. If we had 120 people digging into the history of my life and your life, is that the conclusion they would draw about us? Would they go, you know what? There's no fault here. He's done nothing wrong at all. The only hope I have is to look into his religious practice because he's devout and he's always devout to his God, no matter what. That is the character that he had. The way it is expressed here in verse 3 is that Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials because of the excellent spirit that was in him. That excellent or extraordinary spirit that set him apart. The inner man of Daniel was a man of integrity and character, a man of respect. He was a man that would have been held in high esteem and was held in high esteem. He could be trusted. He was faithful. He was obedient. He was diligent. He didn't try to undermine the success of his. Think about this for a moment. I mean, just really think about it. You're part of a nation that has been plundered. And you're carried off as a slave into a foreign nation, and they give you a position of influence in the government. How many times would people use that position of influence to subtly undermine the well-being of the government that they serve? That is not what Daniel did. Daniel consistently behaved in such a way to show faithfulness to those over him and to serve their best interest. Sometimes even if it meant that it wasn't helping him. In other words, he sacrificed of his own advancement to serve the advancement of those around him. That's the extraordinary spirit. The excellent spirit that Daniel. That's something for us to aspire to possess. To live in such a way that even our enemies, now keep in mind, these are his enemies. The people who don't want him to succeed, the people who are jealous, the people who are looking for a way to cut his legs out from under him, who instead find an excellent spirit of faithfulness And the only way we can possibly get him in trouble is maybe something he's doing religiously is going to cause him a problem. By the way, was there anything that he was doing religiously that was going to cause him a problem? No. The answer to that was no. They had to set a trap for him. Mr. Gregg, you have a comment? So we've got this theme of faithful obedience to God's law in the face of hostility. I'll just say it that way generally, hostility. And ultimately, we're going to see hostile decrees against the people of God. And that theme carries from this chapter all the way through about chapter 12 in this book. So just kind of keep that in mind, that this is laying some groundwork for chapter 7 through 12 as we're moving forward. So let's talk about some application to Christians. Christians ever face slander in opposition to what? You ever heard a Christian called now the word's escaping me. Hypocrite, thank you. You ever heard of a Christian that was called a hypocrite? Is that a slander being made because of fidelity to Christ or not? If it's true, and by the way, do we have Christians who are hypocrites? Is that something that correlates with Daniel's character? No. Do we have Christians that lie? Do we have Christians that don't make good employees, that don't make good subjects of the government? Does that correlate with Daniel? Is that what this is talking about? Look with me, 1 Peter. I think 1 Peter chapter 4. And let's start reading verse 12. And get a feel for what we can expect, what is like what's going on here with Daniel. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you as though something strange were happening to you. Don't be shocked when life gets hard. And when people are doing what? Mistreating you, undermining you, trying to harm you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you're blessed, because the Spirit of glory in God rests upon you. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, or a thief, or an evildoer, or as a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in this name. Did the 12 apostles suffer as Christians? Yeah, how'd they suffer as Christians? Yeah, okay, they were chased uptown sometimes. They were put in jail sometimes. Usually there was one step in between those two things. They were beaten. When they were among the Jews, they were stoned. Not for being meddlers, not for being troublemakers, not for being lawbreakers, not for being murderers, but for what? Preaching the gospel. For doing what's right. For defending others' people's freedom to pursue the gospel. Jews really didn't like Paul. You read the latter half of the book of Acts, it becomes very clear the Jews didn't like Paul at all. You know why? Because Paul accepted the Gentiles and defended them, defended their right not to be circumcised, defended their right not to follow Jewish dietary law. All the while, Paul himself was circumcised, and it seems to me kept those Jewish restrictions for himself, unless keeping them did what? Caused a brother to stumble or impeded his ability to teach. And then he became all things to all men, which is another reason the Jewish folks didn't like him. Because when he was among the Gentiles, if it took it to live like the Gentiles, then he did. So as not to become a stumbling block to anyone's faith, or not to set any hindrance to the gospel at all. That's suffering for Christ. It would have been much easier for Paul to do what? To plead the fact that he was a Pharisee. Apparently from two parents from the sect of the Pharisees, both his mother and father. I was a Pharisee of Pharisees. Despite the fact that he was educated at the feet of some of the greatest Jewish teachers, the rabbis of the day, despite the fact that he had stood head and shoulders, what would have been easy for him to do is say, hey, I am a Jew of the highest order and rank, and to hold to that. Instead, he made speeches like, I'm a Pharisee of Pharisees. I studied at the feet of Gamaliel. I was head and shoulders over my peers. I was given the authority of the high priest to do all these things, but I count all of that as rubbish for the cause of Christ. Rather than use that for protection, he had the integrity to say what was true and right, even though it meant what? That it got him beaten, and then it got him stoned, and then it got him run out of town, and then it got him imprisoned. What happened to some of the disciples? They were crucified. Well, let's just go over there and look for a moment. Turn to the book of Hebrews with me. Start about halfway through verse 35 in Hebrews 11. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. You realize what that's saying, right? All they had to do was renounce their faith, and they could have been released. And instead of doing that, they remained in captivity because they were more interested in the resurrection than they were in their present life. Refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated. Of whom the world was not worthy. Wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and in caves of the earth. Anybody want to live that way? As a vagabond on the earth without a home? Nobody wants to live that way. All of these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. There's something yet to be had for us. The reward's not here yet. That's what happened to the disciples. According to history, the ones that were made sport of in the Colosseum by the Roman emperor, they would bring exotic animals in from all over the world where they went out and conquered, and bring those exotic animals in. And this was their idea of a zoo. You want to see the exotic animals of the world? We're going to show you those exotic animals in their natural habitat. We've got this lion or this tiger or this cheetah or this whatever from Africa. I want you to see the power and the glory of this animal. They would take a Christian and walk them through a hall that had blood-soaked wicks, I'll call them, blood-soaked wicks hanging down, and they would walk through it, and it would get blood all over and then they would send them out there, and the animal would be turned loose on them to tear them limb to limb and consume them in front of the crowds. That's what history suggests was done to these people. For what? For trying to serve God. We can face a whole lot more opposition than we do face. I wonder if we're even thankful that the end of Hebrews 11 doesn't describe our life. Like Daniel, believers today have to be blameless in our conduct. I'm not sure people would often have to look too much further than through one afternoon of our lives to find something that they could accuse us of disregarding the rules and the commands of the government. But they couldn't with Daniel. He was blameless. And we have to, like him, be blameless in our conduct so that accusation can only come in respect to our service to God. The only thing that anyone can accuse us of is being faithful to God. That's what we see in Daniel. And that's what's about to be used against Daniel. Look at verse 6 of Daniel 6. These high officials and satraps came by agreement. We've got a conspiracy here. They came by agreement to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever." By the way, are they really all that concerned about Darius the king? No. In fact, if they could figure out a way to get Darius out of their way and assume his position, that's what they would happily do. But that's not the way they pose this, right? "O King Darius, live forever." If he lives forever, what does that mean? Don't you think about how kings work? How does monarchies work? If this man lives forever, he's king forever. If this man lives forever, there is no chance that any of them is going to rise any higher in the government than what they are right now. All the high officials of the kingdom and the prefects and the satraps and the counselors and the governors, this is how widespread this is. It's not just the prefects. It's not just the satraps. It's the counselors and the governors, the people even below them. They all agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast in the den of lions. Again, is this is this proposition even about any values that they hold? And the answer is no. If it was about values, if they really believed that only the king should be praised, what would they be asking for? A permanent law that would apply to themselves. But instead they said, hey, let's do this for 30 days. Which then would give them some freedom on the other end of this 30 days. They want to lock themselves into a lifetime of being able to do nothing but praise Darius. What if they wanted to accuse Darius at some point? What would this law do to them? That would be a problem. So it was carefully crafted. It was only to be for 30 days. Establish, verse 8, the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Now, this is an important concept about Medo-Persian civil law. Once it was enacted, once it was formalized, once it was a law, it could not be undone. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. Of course he did. It played into his own, played into his own ego. That's what I want to hear. I want my subjects to praise me and glory and honor me and hold me up as the only thing that they should turn to for help and that they should respect and glorify. And by the way, there's not a whole lot new about that either. Governments throughout history have always wanted that place as well to be the only source of hope that their subjects hold. Why? Why do governments want that? Because it keeps them in power. And so there's not a whole lot new going on here. There's just simply a group of people who find in Daniel a character knowing that Daniel is not going to refuse to serve his God, regardless of the fact that there is a 30-day prohibition against it. And let's make the consequence tossing someone into a den of lions. That'll be fun. That's terrifying. Now, again, going back to Daniel's mindset as we close this morning, how easy would it have been for Daniel to say, it's only 30 days. I'm not going to pray for 30 days, and then I'll go right back to praying. Because on the 31st day, this doesn't apply anymore, and all this is back to normal. It's only 30 days, and I don't have to worry about it. God will understand. We don't ever think like that, do we? It's only 1 week. It's only one Lord's Day. God's going to understand. I don't get to go to the Saints game all the time, but I got tickets this week. Certainly God will understand. We'll have to figure out from the rest of the story what the answer to those questions are as we go forward. I appreciate everybody's presence and your participation in the comments that were made this morning.
Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing His mercy and His grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, He'll prepare for us a place.
When we
all get to heaven,
what a day
of rejoicing that will be when we all see Jesus. shall